Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to all those who are present today, whether online or in this seminar hall, for this lecture on human development should precede economic growth, a theoretical, model, and empirical evidence from India's states. Uh, it gives me a lot of pleasure to welcome Professor Santosh Mehrotra, who is a distinguished economist and is currently a senior fellow at the NMML. Uh, He's also visiting professor of economics, Center for Development Studies, University of Bath, UK, research fellow at IZA, Institute of Labor Economics, and has occupied many other distinguished positions. Among them, he was a professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University long ago, 30 years ago, and he worked in the United Nations, in UNICEF, and other divisions, other organizations of the UN for 15 years. So, once again, a very warm welcome and thank you for this uh, lecture. The topic of his lecture today is extremely important and relevant for multiple fields. Of course, it is a very important subject for the field of economics, but for various other kinds of studies, for development as a whole, for policy makers, and even for contemporary history, this is a very, very important subject. And just before the lecture, I had the pleasure of discussing uh, some of these things with him. Now, let me say a few words here. There is this very important debate in the field of economics about whether it is economic growth that ultimately leads to development, or whether it is development, basically the development of human capital, social indicators, literacy, health indicators, etc., which have to precede economic growth on a long term basis. So this is a debate at the heart of economics as it has been conceived and as it has developed in the post Second World War period, broadly speaking, one can say. So, what Professor Mehrotra is addressing today is thus a very, very important debate. And I must say that this debate is all the more important, or rather, uh, it is actually really important for the countries that are described as developing countries, less developed countries, etc., etc., because these are the countries where the basic human development, that is, health indicators, the social indicators, literacy, etc., they are often not up to the mark. So, this debate has been raging on for several decades now, and some of the principal proponents we know about, some of the great names from India, of course. We have T.N. Srinivasan, who obviously believes that it is growth which has to precede human development. And then, of course, Simon Kuznets, he was the classical figure of that sort, a great economist of an earlier generation who believed that, you have to first ensure growth and only then can it lead to development. But in the last 30, 40 years, the important figures who have played an important role in this debate are people like Amartya Sen, Angus Deaton, Joseph Stiglitz, Dani Roderick, and you could obviously Bhagwati is also important, but his position is different. He believes that growth has to precede development, and so these people are sort of they are located on this spectrum at different points. But as I said, that the debate is at the very heart of economic debate in the contemporary world. Very, very important. So now, without any further delay, I would like to invite Professor Mehrotra to proceed with his lecture, and of course, this will be followed by Q&A later.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Mishra, and thank you all so much for turning up on what is really a very important day in most of our lives. We're Rakhi, and we all sort of shouldn't really be here. We should be with our brothers and our sisters. But since the date had been set, we are here, and I am really grateful to you that you actually made the effort to come. That was a very lucid introduction, I have to say, and a very, very important one, I must add. And I will, of course, refer to some of the things that Dr. Mishra spoke about. I do have a PowerPoint, which I will use. And notice that while what was circulated was in the form of a statement, you can see that I have formulated the question, that statement as a question. Because really, it is a question that motivates both the theoretical model that I will try and spell out, as well as the empirical work that we've done in India states. By when I say we, I have to add the name of Dr. Jajati Parida, who is an associate professor of economics at the University of Hyderabad, with whom I've done this empirical work. The theoretical work I had already done several years earlier, and I've actually applied it globally across the world in Latin America. I have a new book which some of you who are members of the NMML official and non-official group might have seen reference to. A book of mine has just been translated into Spanish for the Latin American market, which is called Macroeconomic and Social Policies to Reduce Poverty. Are there lessons for Latin America from Asia? And so I've used this theoretical model in that context as well, which in a sense permeates a lot. This model actually has permeated a lot of my work in the last several years. So let me start straight away without any further ado. This is I'm going to lay out the structure of my presentation. I'm in full screen. Yeah, I'm in slideshow, right? Yeah, good. I'm sorry, that's too far away from me. I'm going to read it here. No, it's good. I'm going to read from here, if you don't mind. No, I can see. हाँ, इसको दिखाई नहीं दे रहा. आएगा? अभी तो आ रहा था.
It will just come.
Okay, ठीक है. So let me start. Good. So I'll begin by discussing this issue conceptually. Should human development precede economic growth? I raise this question because, as Ravi rightly pointed out, a lot of the literature in the economics profession, as well as the general development economics profession, has tended to take it for granted that economic growth comes first and then human development. There's a certain sequence involved here in logically as well as sort of historically that one should, that EG, and I'm going to use the words EG and HD for short so that we can move fast, that EG normally should precede HD. So I'll start with this conceptual model, which is not just between ED and HD, but also draws in the relationship of HD with poverty, of growth with poverty. And so what I will show to you is the three are actually very closely intertwined, both conceptually as well as empirically. When I'm speaking about, you may say, oh, poverty, but then poverty has a money metric dimension as well as a non-money metric dimension, right? A money metric dimension means income poverty, and a non-money metric dimension could mean human development poverty, human social indicators poverty. When I'm using the word poverty, I'm using it in the money metric sense only, because human development is obviously already being captured. Now, this theoretical model, which I call a model of dual synergies, builds on Amartya Sen's capability approach, and Paul Roma, who was a Nobel Prize winning economist and who was till recently a chief economist of the World Bank, and his work on new growth theory. I'm not going to spend any degree of time on either the capability approach, or for that you'll have to go back to my paper or to my book. I'm not going to take you there. I'm going to keep you very much, grounded in India. And then we go on to empirically test the model. So where we examine the causal connection between economic growth and human development based on data in India for 1993 to 2018. In other words, for a full 25-year period. So where we argue that states with sustained growth of over 5%, in fact even 7% per annum, had seen more advancement in terms of HD prior to this sustained growth like this. And we establish a link between EG and HD, and we say that there is a feedback loop between growth and income poverty reduction, and between income poverty reduction and in the improvement in health and education indicators. And finally, we argue, of course, that to sustain growth, economic growth, improvement in human development and income poverty reduction should be given the topmost priority. Now, I'm overstating my case. Topmost priority at least means that it should be equivalent to economic growth. By and large, you look at the history of our development or the history of development in any developing part of the world, and you'll find that what has been the focus of all policy is been economic growth as opposed to human development. Okay, and one derivative thing that I will argue, so I'll not spend a great deal of time. If you're interested, I'll deal with the subject in questions, is that we argue empirically that there's been great divergence after the early 1990s all the way until now between the northern and eastern states of India on the one hand and the southern and western states on the other. There was some divergence in human development levels of these two parts of our country, but this divergence has increased enormously over the last 25 years, and that is because of this lack of focus on HD in the northern and eastern states. Let me move on very quickly. I called it the dual synergies model. This is synergy one. I'll come to the second synergy in the next slide. Focus your attention for a minute on the first column, which is showing, which is the cursor, the laser bullet, नहीं, वो नहीं चलता है, चलता है? चलिए कोई बात नहीं. So just focus your attention on the first column, and you can see social service inputs and processes here, education services, family planning services, very important part of health services, health, nutrition services, water and sanitation services. Now look at the remainder of the graph. Let's look at the red, what's written, the text in the red. Human development outputs and outcomes. Now, what have you got there? Knowledge, family size, health status, nutritional status, and healthy living conditions. So education inputs of social service, education inputs, of course, generate knowledge for the population, for the citizenry. The same applies to family planning services. That has an effect on family size. So this dark blue bar, dark blue diagonal line that we're seeing across this diagram or this matrix is showing the direct relationships. Only the direct relationships between the social service input and the human development outcome. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the light blue cells, which I'm arguing in this conceptual framework is showing forget about the hooks. I'm going to talk about the hooks. Don't look at the hooks for the moment, right? The light blue is showing the indirect effects of education, of family planning on those outcomes, the human HD outcomes. For instance, and for brevity of time, I'm going to focus only on the first row. Education, gives us not just knowledge, an ordinary citizen, not just knowledge. It also impacts family size. How? the higher the educational level of the mother in particular, and every sentence I'm going to speak here is based on empirical research globally is well established. Okay, education services, especially of the woman, are absolutely critical for family size, but that effect begins to kick in particularly at secondary level, not at the primary level of education. Similarly, education is very important for health status. Why? Because that mother, if she is well educated, she actually is prepared to look out for signs of distress in herself, in her health, in her child's health, in her husband's health, and is going to respond by taking that child to the doctor. And if she is not educated enough, she will not be sensitive to what is likely to happen. It might be too late by the time she discovers. Okay? Education has an impact on nutritional status. What do I mean by that? It means that the higher the educational level of the family, it means that that family is likely to be aware of what is the difference between carbohydrate, fat, and protein, what the balance should be, at what age, how much the balance should be. If, I know that if you're very poor, you end up eating a starch-based diet, you have too little fat, fat, you have too little protein. We can get to those complications, but the point is, in the absence of education, you're not going to be even aware of what is actually required. Similarly, has the effect of education on healthy living conditions, meaning what is you see, when I'm talking about healthy living conditions, I'm thinking of three things particularly: safe water, safe sanitation, and good hygiene, high quality hygiene. And the three together impact both your nutritional status as well as your health status. I'm now very quickly going to move to the hooks. I've now spoken about the direct effects, the indirect effects. I'm now going to talk about how these outcomes, these human development outcomes, how a good nutritional status impacts education. That's what the meaning of that hook is. That means we are talking about a feedback loop whereby the education, let's say the nutritional status of the child or of the adult actually has an impact on education itself. What do I mean by that? If the child is hungry, or if the child is actually suffering from vitamin A deficiency or iron deficiency, the child might be getting retarded, or the child's eyesight might be not so good. All of these things are impacted by micronutrient deficiency, but PEM deficiency, meaning protein energy malnutrition, also will impact the ability. For instance, why do you think we have these problems with our children in school, Sarkari schools in particular, that they reach class 5, they haven't actually even attained class 2 levels of learning? One of the reasons is, of course, they don't have the atmosphere at home, all the wherewithal that you would expect, that you and I would have. But the other is that they're malnourished. They walk into that school, they're malnourished, their mind is not focused. And their brain has gotten already underdeveloped between being conceived, being in utero. I could go into the details, I don't have the time, I'm not going to go there. In utero, or in the first 1 or 2, 3, 4, 3 years. And when the child enters school, the neural connections have not happened because the child has been malnourished either in utero or in the first 2, 3 years. All of us know that in our country, even in NFHS 5, malnutrition levels are at 34% across the country. Our malnutrition levels, child malnutrition levels, are actually higher than in Africa on average. I'm going to move on very quickly. You've understood the argument I'm making Yeah, I could explain all these hooks, each one, but I won't because I'm already taking too much time in this conceptual part. And let me now turn very quickly, and I'll be brief here because although the focus of my empirical analysis will be very much here on the second synergy. But before I explain to you what this second synergy is between economic growth, no, the three red little boxes that you're seeing: economic growth, human capabilities or human capital. For simplicity, I don't want to go into human capabilities, sense approach. I'm going to focus my attention on human capital, human meaning health and education alone, and income poverty reduction. Look at the three arrows running from one to the other. And each arrow, notice, each line has arrows running in both directions. What is the meaning of that? The meaning of that is that there is a relationship between these two, and it's an iterative relationship. It's a feedback loop going on between each of those three main macro level variables at the level operating at the level of the society or the economy. And therefore, the assumption here we are talking about is that each of them is equally important. It can't be that economic growth should precede human capability development or income poverty reduction. You need to take direct actions to reduce poverty at the same time that we are investing in health or education, at the same time that we are doing all the right things for economic growth. Okay, that's essentially the argument here. And now, one last point about this slide, and I'm going to move to the empirical analysis. Look at the bottom left, the human capabilities or human capital. The first synergy, I'm going to go back to the previous slide. The outcomes of the first synergy, these synergies are operating at the micro level, at the level of the household, or at the level of the individual. In the case of each one of you, these synergies are operating. The reason why you're sitting here and not living in a slum outside or working on Manrega is because as you were growing up and as your children are growing up, each of these synergies has been working for decades to bring you up to this level. At the societal level, you get this is the outcome at the societal level when I'm talking about the bottom left, human capabilities or human capital. The previous slide is about micro at the individual or the household level. This is at the macro or the societal level. So the first synergy is actually subsumed within the human capabilities or the human capital. It's part of it. So the dominant synergy in my conceptual frame is actually this one, the second one. And I'm not going to walk you through each one of those texts, but you can see how each one of those bits of text is actually showing how and why. I'm going to talk about it during the presentation, but how and why each of these interact with each other, and they have a mutuality and a reinforcing effect on each one of them. And I'm just going to the last point I'm going to make about this conceptual framework. This conceptual framework, as I've said to you earlier, I've used to apply it to the Latin American countries, to African countries, and to Asian development, and of course to our own country. And my focus, of course, from this point onwards is exclusively going to be on India. I mean, I just want you to appreciate the conceptual point that it's a theoretical frame which can be used to understand the level of development that any state has reached, that any country has reached. It's a conceptual model, an analytical model, which will help you to actually understand where the bottlenecks are, where are the synergies breaking down. Because if these synergies are actually operating in the life of every nation, in the policies that countries are formulating, then there will be a consistent improvement across over a period of time. Okay. Now, these relationships have been studied internationally, and I'm going to refer to some of that literature. They've not been studied very much in India. So, for instance, in an article about 11 years ago, Shri et al. In World Development, among the best-known journals in development economics, World Development, they argue that HD and EG tend to move together over the long run. So they argue, in fact, for the first time, in a way that I'm going to be arguing, that EG can be sustained only if it accompanies improvements in HD. Notice what how I formulated. EG can be sustained. You can get short bursts of growth. You may get 8% growth for a few years, and then it stops. If you want to sustain growth, as China did for a 30-year period, you need to invest in human development upfront, which is what China did. In the first 30 years, between 50 and 80, before the economic reforms began, their health and education outcome indicators were, if you were to compare them to ours, were far ahead of ours. And so then when growth really takes off, it's a very equalizing growth. It's a poverty reducing growth. I'm not going to speak very much about China. I'm going to move on. But it should at least accompany improvements in HD. But it would be better, we argue, that improvements in HD precede economic growth for economic growth to be sustained. Otherwise, what will happen is that you will get bursts of growth, and then it will pause or it will slow down, and it is not sustained. Why should it be sustained? Why is this important? Because all developing countries have a certain window of opportunity called the demographic dividend. It's a demographic dividend comes but once in the life of a nation. In our case, it started in the early 80s. It's going to end in less than 20 years before the end of next decade. If we have not become a nearly developed country over this decade and the next, our opportunity is lost forever. Now, that's a strong statement. I can come back to it if you're interested, but it truly is. This is the great opportunity that China took, realized the demographic dividend, and that's why, although it started out at the same level of per capita income as us in 1980 or in 1990, their per capita income is 4 times ours, their gross GDP is 5 times ours today. I'm now going to sort of move on because I mentioned these people, Romer, etc. I just want to sort of mention Rannis, Gustav Rannis at Yale, Francis Stewart at Oxford. Francis and I used to work together, as did Rannis in New York when I was chief economist of the Global Human Development Report 20 years ago. They've mapped the link between EG and HD across a large group of developing countries, and they see HD as both an input into and an outcome of the development process. However, the nature of the feedback and causality between HD and EG has not been adequately examined in India, which is what I proceed to do. And essentially, that's what I'm going to speak about together. Okay, so we conducted this analysis empirically at 3 levels. One, we just looked at HDI, and then we looked at the components of the HDI, the Human Development Index, with growth. And then we also looked at, obviously, the relationship between poverty and human development, and poverty and growth as Synergy 2 intends to do. And what you can see, the 3 levels are: 1, we look at simple correlations across Indian states. And what you're seeing in this graph is the correlation. It's just a correlation here. And the dots are all states. India states over a 25-year period, the period that is mentioned there, 92 to 2018. And you can see that if you were to first, so of course, we first had to estimate the Human Development Index for each state, and we had to do it over this period of time. And we brought together the economic growth year on year. And what you can see is a very clear relationship, and why you should expect this to be what you're seeing on this graph is, well, as educational outcomes have positive implications for employability and earnings, in the long run, it is likely to reduce income poverty. It's likely to improve the Human Development Index and boost economic growth via labor productivity. Let me quickly move on and show you what the relationship looks like over that 25-year period between growth and poverty in the states of India. And look again, on the y-axis, you've got poverty, headcount ratio. Headcount ratio means essentially the share of the population below the poverty line. And you've got on the x-axis the economic growth. And again, you can see quite clearly a strong relationship. Now, you can also see here, there are many states above the line, the regression line, and there are many states below the line. I'm going to come back to that, okay? That's not the main subject of my argument, but it's certainly a spillover, an outcome of the argument that comes out from the paper. Let me just say a few words about this, which is that sort of secondary part of the argument that emerges from the paper is that the divergence in per capita income was not particularly great between states until 1991. It increases sharply over the last 25 years. And we argued that the important reason why this does is the fact that prior to 1992 and since 1992 as well, the southern and the western states, which have sharply diverged from the northern and the eastern states, by and large, I'm making a broad generalization. It's a crude generalization, as you will see when I list the state. That divergence actually significantly increases. States which sustain high growth of gross state domestic product, that means over 7% and even 9 to 10% over a 25-year period, please note. I mean, 9 to 10% is like China, right? So the states which sustain high growth of GSDP, they had advanced in human development, and these include Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra, Maharashtra, and Gujarat. And in the north, notice Haryana, Himachal, Punjab, and Delhi. And then among the major states, obviously in our study we were focusing on the major states. The rest, well, mostly northern, growing, but slow GDP growth, under 5%, not over 7%, at best between 5 to 6 on average. Please note, obviously you're getting spurts even here. Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Odisha, and Assam. And I've already shown you the positive correlation in the previous 4 panels between EG and HDI, and a negative correlation between growth and the incidence of poverty. And I'm claiming that these relationships could be explained through the synergies that I began by this discussion with. We find negative correlation between economic growth and infant mortality rate, which is what we are using as a proxy for health outcome indicators. I'm sure everyone understands what infant mortality rate is. And this is consistent with our argument that major Indian states like Kerala, Delhi, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Punjab, Karnataka, and Himachal, which sustained growth of over 7% GSDP, also had very low IMR versus other states. Now, it's very important to know that as a country as a whole, we spend only 1.15% of GDP, I'm talking about public health, on public health, okay? I'm talking about public expenditure. By and large, if you were to compare across the globe, we are one of the small spending countries, and it's not increased even in recent years. Unfortunately, we're still spending only somewhere between 1.15% and 1.3% of GDP. I'm talking about government expenditure. As opposed to that, some 70% of total health expenditure in our country is accounted by private out-of-pocket expenditure. And the reason why our private expenditures are high, and this is, historically and across the countries this is true, is because public expenditure is low. So these states, which are high growth states, which have low IMR states, are states which sustain well over 1% of GSDP on public health. Other state governments did not. And similarly, we find that at the all India level, mean years of schooling, that's the indicator we use. The Human Development Index also uses this. The Global Human Development Index uses mean years of schooling as the proxy for the education outcome. Mean years of schooling increased in India, I'm talking about at the sort of national level, increased from 3.6 years at the in the early 90s to nearly 6 years by the end of by 2018. And we know, we have evidence of this, because not only did we sort of universalize primary net enrollment at 97% in 2007, we then universalized upper primary by about 2009, and very quickly from that point onwards, secondary enrollment shoots up because of the pressure from the bottom. Between 2010 and 2015, our secondary enrollment, classes 9 and 10, it went from 58% nationally to 85% in a matter of 5 years by 2015. That's and with gender parity, very important, with gender parity. It's happening with gender parity, which is one reason why you're seeing a decline in population growth rates very rapidly in the most recent past. Our TFR, our total fertility rate, is coming down because we've not only achieved pretty much universal secondary enrollment, which at our level of per capita income in 2015, few countries managed to achieve, and we did it with gender parity. That's a very important development in our country, which is marked by very significant, gender-based discrimination, not just in education, in the labor market, everywhere else across society. That is the case. Okay. So we're saying this divergence in growth rates emerges primarily because we find that the states which were growing fast had prior to that already achieved high mean years of schooling, had achieved low IMR, in other words, had invested. Okay, I'm moving on. I'm just going to very quickly, because I've already taken about 25 minutes, 26 minutes. I hope to finish in about a slide of my own. I think I've got only 4 more slides, 4 at best. So, human capital and poverty. Well, why is there a link between human capital and poverty? As educational outcomes have positive implications for employability and earnings, as I was saying, in the long run, it's likely to reduce income poverty and boost economic growth through increasing labor productivity, which is what we are seeing in the fast growth states. And clearly, the states which did not invest as much, you don't see that. What about the relationship between poverty and growth? Well, reduction in poverty incidence improves, of course, the standard of living of the poorest people in there. It also changes their family spending behavior, following what is in development economics is called Engel's law, where with a declining share of expenditure on food and clothing and an increasing share of expenditure on housing, education, healthcare. Why is this important? What is the significance of the Engel's law? This, for instance, I'll give you a comparison. If you look at the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, the weight of food in the CPI in our country is 45%. So if food inflation is high, overall inflation is high in our country, right? In Thailand, the weight of food and beverages in the CPI in Thailand is about 15%. In the US, it is about 8 to 10%. In other words, most of the expenditure, household consumption expenditure, is on non-food items. In Thailand, which is an upper middle income country, we are a low middle income country since 2007, and and in the US it's even 9%. So if you have less money spent left over after you've met your food items expenditure, then the demand is not there for manufacturing or for quality services. For the vast majority of the population, they're spending a very significant part of their earnings, and this is the average, please note. Obviously, for 50% of the population, the weight is not 45, the weight is likely to be 75 or even more. So where is the margin of the degree of freedom to actually increase your expenditure and consumption of manufactured goods? That has a knock-on effect for demand on manufacturers. Okay, human capital and growth, what's the relationship? You see, a rising share of public spending on health and education will result from faster growth, because more and more expenditure, more and more revenues are coming into the government. The state is able to increase its spending on health or on education. That's at the public level. But if growth is happening, people are standard living is rising, they have households spending freedom available to actually spend more on health, on their own health, on their own education. So both on the private side as well as the public side, growth is very important for human capital. And the relationship from human capital to growth I've already spoken about. But all this is still in the realm of causation. This is the first level of analysis that we talked about. Now I'm going to move very quickly to the OLS regressions that we do, ordinary least squares regression. We test 4 models, and then I will close with one last analysis where we actually check for robustness of our OLS with using Granger causality. So I told you this analysis is going to be somewhat technical, but if you want me to take it to a more broader level, I'm happy to discuss that in the question and answer. But in order to leave plenty of time for discussion, I'm going to move fast through this. So we estimate 4 separate models in the ordinary least squares mode, use labor and capital as key determinants of growth along with other controlling variables to explore whether HD indicators play any role in determining economic growth of states. We do it by state, right? Through pool data. Now, I'm going to sort of just ask you to go in the interest of time so that you get more time to ask me questions. I'm not going to walk you through the technical parts of the 4 models that we estimate. I think you are already getting the broad tenor of my argument. And I'm just going to sort of, in the interest of time, turn to my last 2 slides, where we check for robustness of our argument emerging from the OLS analysis using Granger causality tests. Now, I'm going to show you the next slide, which is my last substantive slide. And if you look for a second at the second column, what is the null hypothesis? And notice that the null hypothesis is also stated in the negative. Growth does not cause HDI. You see, you're looking at the growth in HDI row, and HDI does not cause growth, because null hypotheses are always stated in the negative. That's why I'm sort of just going to ask you to, the null hypothesis is always stated in the negative. This is because you have to be able to prove something is indeed true by stating the opposite. And technically speaking, the word hypothesis is a Greek word that means an assumption subject to verification. And so the null hypothesis is what we test with statistics through the Granger causality model. And we find, if you look at the growth in HDI relationship, the growth in poverty relationship, the growth in IMR relationship, growth in mean years of schooling, the mean years of schooling and poverty, the IMR and poverty, and the IMR, and I would imagine that this is, I can't see the last word, but I think you're getting the point. And notice that each one of the null hypotheses is, we test for both. Growth does not cause poverty, poverty does not cause growth. However, now just finally, I want you to say what the test statistics look like. And in all of them, either at the 1% confidence level or the 5% confidence level, the 10% confidence level, we are finding strong relationships exist. In other words, the synergy that I began by talking about, the feedback loop that I talked about, that's absolutely critical, clearly, in our outcome. And now the final slide. What is the summary of the argument that I'm making? The summary of the arguments we are making is that human development should, because what we do in the Granger causality is we use actually lagged variables. In other words, we say, what was IMR like 5 years ago, and how does it impact growth over the next 5 years following? You get the point? So we use lag variables, and that's what we're attempting to do in the Granger causality. So in other words, we are testing for whether we get strong results or not, and we got clearly strong results. And essentially, in this manner, we are able to establish the feedback loop between growth and income poverty, between income poverty and improvement in health and education indicators. And so that's why we are arguing that to sustain economic growth, improvements in human development and income poverty reduction, instead of this one-sided, single-minded focus on achieving economic growth. When you go back home this evening, turn on your television, and you will hear what you hear about is what's happening to the economic growth. You will really hear a discussion about IMR, nutritional levels, water and sanitation levels, family planning. Rarely. What's happening to the education system? Your mean years of school. Single-minded focus. I'm talking about the media, but I'm saying this is true of governments, by and large. And these governments have clearly been impacted by economists of a certain generation and a certain mindset. And finally, and this is my last bullet, we would even argue that divergence between the states over the last 25 years in HD and in per capita incomes, right? Something that has really bothered the 15th Finance Commission, that so much so that it's been concerned about trying to balance out. Every Finance Commission is concerned about ensuring, faster growth in the states which are growing more slowly. But it's this divergence is happening at such a phenomenal pace, and has grown so much that I don't have to tell you how many millions of people leave the northern states of India for the southern states, for the western states, because that's where they find work. They are not finding the work in their own state. And the main reason for this is precisely this growing divergence. Let me stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mehrotra, for that very insightful lecture. May I now invite our director, Shri Sanjiv Nandan Sahai.
I have to leave. I would like to ask just a couple of questions. Don't mind. One is what is it that caused the southern and western states to invest when come in public provisioning of goods, education, health, etc., and that north and east missed? I'm sure they face the same information that all the states had. The second question is, a public policy question. You talked about the budget constraint that states face. Would you advocate that, given the budget constraint, the states focus on income and food security? Because there's I have limited resources, and that with the income, people go and buy education and health from the private sector. Especially since many of the schools, the government schools, do not have teachers who are available or doctors who are absent. In any case, the reality of life is that the private sector is substituting, and even the government doctors are doing private practice rather than spending time in the clinics. Sorry.
Yeah, very good. I'm glad. I'm going to answer your question before we open it up to anyone else. I came prepared for the why question. And I should tell you that this is something that I've been reflecting on and doing some work about. And my next paper is actually very much going to be about that. So I can share with you where my current thinking is. Because this is a complex, there's going to be a complex answer to your, and slightly long if you'll forgive me, which has historical dimension, which has sociological dimension, as well as a political dimension. But these arguments, or three sets of arguments that I'm going to give, are certainly work in progress, even in my mind and in my writing. So I'm not going to stick my neck out and say I'm happy to learn from any of you on each of these things that I'm going to say, and I will come to your public policy one after I deal with this because your first question is actually goes to the sort of heart of the matter. The historical dimension or explanation has an agrarian dimension. Now, I'm going to resort to a certain degree of simplification here, and I know that there are complications to the argument that I'm about to make, but at the same time, at the risk of some simplification, I'm still going to make this argument. If you look at independence, what the nature of the agrarian system that the northern states inherited in 1947 from our colonial masters, and compare it to the agrarian system that the southern states had got in the Madras and the Bombay presidencies, they're radically different. I'm sure my historian friends in the room, as well as Ravi, will bear me out that, and I repeat that, at risk of some oversimplification, I'm saying this, that the northern states under the permanent settlement developed a zamindari system which involved a intermediary, which in a sense was really not present in the Rayatwadi system in the Bombay and Madras presidencies. And the fact that there was a zamindar in the northern, especially this Bihar, Bengal, eastern UP, perhaps central UP belt, had long-term consequences for the impoverishment of the peasantry and of the people and the class structure as it emerges. The absence of this intermediary proved to be willy-nilly, not that it was intended necessarily by the colonial state, turned out to be beneficial for the southern states. So that the legacy and the remnants of the zamindari system continued well into our decades after independence. And it became very difficult to carry out the kind of land reform that happened in Kerala, that happened in Kashmir, because this class of zamindars made sure that despite the fact that UP had the earliest zamindari abolition, the class that was dispossessed fought back and fought back hard. And that fighting back hard, in a sense, made sure that, and because they had political clout, you and I know this, they had political clout. And they could fight back and they could win that. In the South, that didn't happen to the same extent. I'm going to, for brevity, I'm going to, for on account of the limited time available, I'm going to stop there. That's on the agrarian historical side. Then the sociological. The southern states, particularly Kerala, particularly Tamil Nadu, also, and these, please remember that these states didn't have borders then, I'm talking about colonial times, did not have borders then of what they are today, and Maharashtra. So Phule in Maharashtra, Narayan Guru in Kerala, Periyar and his successors in Tamil Nadu, all these people played a transformative effect in bringing together the subaltern castes in movements against the upper castes in the southern states and in the West in a way that did not happen in the North. This had sociological impacts, particularly very important impacts in Kerala. I don't have the time, we don't have the time to go into why Kerala evolved in the way, why Kerala's IMR 30 years ago was like that of the United States. Believe it or not, I don't know how many of you know this. 30 years ago, Kerala's IMR was similar to that of the United States, as did Sri Lanka. I'm not going to go there. So these movements, you did not see a replication of this until about 30 years ago in a UP or a Bihar. I'm not saying there was not a social justice movement in Bihar. I'm not saying there was not a social justice movement led by Mahavati and Mulayam Singh Yadav in UP. But it comes, first of all, very late. Secondly, it comes on a agrarian system where I think we've already talked about where the constraints from the agrarian system were coming from, and how these people, how these leaders in the North evolved. Now, I know I'm making sort of generalizations. Many of you will dispute that. I can fully understand that. But the fact of the matter is that the kind of social transformation and mobilization of castes that took place in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu, in Maharashtra, nothing of that kind happened in Bihar or UP, let alone Bengal. And why, in fact, these social movements and the political parties that emerged from it, of course, the political parties emerged in the South also, but the political parties that emerged in the northern states were by no means either paragons of virtue in respect of the in their efforts when they were in power to realize the social justice goals which they professed. That was not the case in the South. We can look into why in the South those movements did translate into social policy changes which were transformative, totally transformative. Thirdly, and I close with this, political. And I haven't really figured out why this is the case, but what you find very important and very interesting is the following. And this is a post-independence phenomenon. That the majority of southern states have a two-party system. Majority. The majority of our northern states don't have a two-party system. They have multiple parties. And the moment you get the fragmentation of the vote of the subaltern, which you see very clearly in UP, you see it also in Bihar. When you get that fragmentation of the vote, you don't get two parties. And when you don't get two parties, you don't get the kind of ideological crystallization and intellectual vigor in the northern states around social policies in the same way that you see in the south. So it's a combination, in other words, I'm saying, of historical, sociological, and political factors. Now, I can make one comparison here between some parts of the northern state and the set of northern states and other parts. And I find this a very important distinction, which sort of strengthens the argument that I'm making. Look at Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. They have two-party systems, and they have actually broken away from the Bimaru category. In the last 25 years or so, they have actually broken away from this Bimaru category. The only states which are today left in the Bimaru category are UP, Bihar, and Jharkhand. I don't think you would call Rajasthan or Madhya Pradesh as Bimaru, really. And one of the reasons why is this straight fight between two major political parties. You don't see this fragmentation of vote in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh that you see in UP, Bihar, and you also, of course, don't see in the southern states. Let me very quickly turn to your other question about public policy. When I talk about in the conceptual model poverty reduction, I'm not talking about simply as a derivative variable, meaning growth will lead to poverty reduction. I'm talking about direct policy actions to reduce poverty, in addition to the growth which will lead to income poverty reduction. Because growth which will lead to poverty reduction is only that kind of growth which generates jobs in the non-farm sector and not in the agricultural sector. Some jobs in the agriculture sector, because as long as you get only increases in jobs in the agriculture sector, you're going to see continuous rural distress. So yes, I agree with you that income security through job growth is critical to a poverty reduction. But income security, we've come to a point where if for millions upon millions, incomes are not growing, and they have not been growing, certainly for about a decade. A significant proportion of the poor are actually stuck in a vicious cycle. Because I've done recent estimates for Tendulkar poverty line, and it's very dismal, I'm sorry to say. And essentially, food security goes to the heart of the matter. Because notice the nutritional status outcomes that I was talking about. Food security alone doesn't ensure nutritional security. Nutritional security means that you've got enough proteins being supplied to the poor children, particularly to poor families. Are we supplying proteins? No, and they on their own incomes, which if they are not growing, they are not able to supply themselves. We also want to make sure that the deficiencies in micronutrients, meaning vitamin A, iodine deficiency, and iron deficiency, are being taken care of. That requires a functional public health system. So this takes me to the second part of your question. The private sector has grown hugely in the 90s and the last 20 years in both health and education, to the detriment of the public systems. And this is not true to the same extent in South India. It's particularly true in the north. I can tell you my own experience in 2017, at the request of the new government that had come to power in 2017. A team was constituted to create a new state health policy for Uttar Pradesh. I went there, I spent months upon months working with a team. We produced a state health policy. This was in consonance with the national health policy document that had just emerged in January 17. Believe it or not, I mean, had our recommendations been taken on board, the kind of mayhem that you saw during COVID in UP, you would not have seen. Unfortunately, precious little has changed in UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, in the health sector. So the foundational argument, and I close with this, sir, is this, and this is based on international evidence, that if the state does not spend on health and the state does not increase spending on education, the people end up having to spend. And the people end up having to spend. People who are not buying enough dal or buying enough oil to ensure fat content and protein content in their diet, if they're if they're having to spend on their children's education or their own health or their children's health, that means they have less money left over to buy manufacturers. So the demand for manufacturers cannot grow, which is the reason why you have a CPI where the weight of food is 45% and it's not dropping. This is an unacceptable situation. So in other words, there is an iterative relationship between public expenditure and private out-of-pocket expenditure on both health as well as on education. It's and I've noticed that I'm not blaming this government or that government. I'm saying this is a huge north-south divide, huge, and this is undermining the prospects for the realization of our demographic dividend.
To add something, sir, in Tamil Nadu, the midday meal started way back in 1925, Madras Municipal Council. And all over the state, it started in 1964. In India, we started all over the country. Of course, Tamil Nadu is part of India. Way back in 94. So there are 2 generations ahead of us.
Absolutely.
So that political party, which the social reform movement, that itself became a political party.
I agree with you.
And they were committed to social justice.
Absolutely.
But so the important point which I would like to highlight is the role of the Christian missionaries in developing that leadership in terms of kind of taking on this kind of a justice, kind of having a justice party. And I want to ask you, Tamil Nadu has 59% reservation, yet it is growing. The state is developing. So is there what is the relationship between affirmative action and growth of its state?
You see, I would put the actions on affirmative action in the category of direct poverty reduction measures. Now, I know we can criticize the Jayalalitha freebies, the Mitzi and this and that, but you know, Tamil Nadu has a high level of per capita income. The low middle class and even the poor have, you know, all the basics taken care of. They're already there in their homes. And I haven't said all this, but I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that these are, in the southern states, are our most industrialized states.
Yes.
They're the ones who are generating the most non-farm jobs. Why do you think workers from the north and the east flock to Kerala, Tamil Nadu, face discrimination? You know, they just live there. And they were the ones who were fleeing COVID and walked thousands of miles or cycled or did rickshaws or whatever they did, you know what I'm talking about. So why does this happen? Because they are generating the non-farm jobs, sir. And our northern states are not generating the non-farm jobs. I mean, I can cite data on this. I'm a labor economist. I work on this all the time. It's really tragic. Our dividend, if our dividend is being lost, we are losing it in the north and east. We cannot afford to lose our dividend. Because let me explain to you why. I mean, I agree with everything that you, by the way, say. Completely agree. Why can't we afford to lose the dividend? Everyone must understand this, and our policymakers don't understand, our academics don't understand, our journalists certainly don't understand.
Can we take some more questions?
Yeah.
You?
Any more? Okay, I will pick up your answer.
Yeah, because I know you are getting ready for a long answer. So
no, please.
Yeah. Any more question? Yes, please go ahead, Javed.
सर मुझे ये पूछना है सर 1920 के बाद जैसे हम देखते हैं जनसंख्या विस्फोट, उसके बाद आज़ादी के बाद जो हमारी कंडीशन, हाँ मैं बोलो सर, जैसे कि आपने बताया, मैं थोड़ा सा पीछे चलता हूँ। 1920 के बाद जो जनसंख्या विस्फोट देख रहे हैं, उसके बाद आज़ादी की जो कंडीशंस है, फिर हम प्लानिंग जो पंचवर्षीय योजना अपना रहे हैं, उसके बावजूद भी 1990 से पहले जो इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ है वो इस स्टेट्स की लगभग इक्वल चल रही है। 1990 के बाद जो उसमें एकदम बदलाव आ रहा है, तो क्या जो 1990 में जो पॉलिसीज अपनाई गई थी एलपीजी, क्या वो उसके पीछे कारण है?
ठीक, इलियास साहब।
Good afternoon, sir. I am very thankful to you for such a enlightened lecture. I have listened here. I am not an economist. I work in history, so my question comes from that area actually. I have read something on Great Divergence. So my question is, as you have argued very well, however, that HD, human development, should precede ED, economic development. My question is on the basis of the writings on Great Divergence, which published since 1980s, Kenneth Pomeranz and Prasannan Parsarthis. Those people compared the human growth from China and India to Britain and argued that China and India were not on a bad condition on the scale of human growth as compared to Britain. So how
around what time, if I might just seek
in the 18th century? In the 18th century, yeah. When Great Divergence actually began, they argued that Great Divergence began only in 18th century, and the human development conditions were not bad in India and China. Actually, Kenneth Pomeranz worked on China, and Prasannan Parsarthi worked on South India, especially. These people argued that the human conditions are not bad. Human development conditions are not bad in these two countries in 18th century as compared to Britain. So how can you think your argument may sustain in history that if human development did not precede economic development in England at the time of Industrial Revolution in late 17th and 18th century, so how can this argument you are proposing could sustain? I have a lot of other questions in my mind. Now, but we will discuss that later. Thank you.
There are some questions of my own, and of course, time is running out now, so I better ask them rather than wait. As I said, we are of course very thankful to you for providing so many insights into this very important subject. Both from the point of view of history and history of development in India and the world, some very important questions arise. In response to what the director asked, you gave that three-pronged explanation. Now, I want to act slightly as devil's advocate in this and argue that you know your point about different kind of land tenure systems is well taken. It certainly had an impact. I mean, the difference between the Mahalwadi system and the zamindari system which prevailed in much of north and eastern India on the one hand, and the Rayatwari which prevailed in much of western and southern India. I have no dispute with that. But I just want to add to this in the sense that I don't think that it is the system itself which contributed, or it contributed in the way that you argued that it contributed. That because in the north there was an absentee zamindar and he did not want to lose power, etc. No, my argument on the contrary, as a student of history, is that North India was subjected to much more economic extraction by the colonial state through the agrarian system that it developed as compared to the West and the South. And that is precisely the reason that, you see, and this is another question I wanted to ask you. You see, I don't dispute the fact that human development has to precede economic growth in a sustained manner. But the question which is much more fundamental is, why is it that some parts of the world or some parts of the country were able to do it while others were not able to do it? And there my argument is that they were not able to do it because North India and Eastern India suffered far more at the hands of the colonial state directly in terms of land revenue that they extracted. So the system was important, and I'm not saying that the semi-feudal or zamindari system did not contribute in any way. There was no social backwardness because of that. I'm not arguing that. But I suggest to you that probably the principal reason that these states found it very difficult to invest in human capital the way certain states in southern and western India were able to do was the much more massive economic exploitation that they suffered during the colonial rule. Now, this relates to the fundamental nature of the British Empire, which, as we know, was not a continental empire. It was not a land-based empire. It was a maritime empire. So, in a maritime empire, it is very natural that it is the coastal areas of the empire which will suffer far less than the interior regions. There is that well-founded, I think, Jeffrey Sachs and Vajpayee worked on Africa in this, comparing the development of coastal regions with the hinterland. So you see, all the great cities of the empire, they developed in coastal areas, Bombay, Madras, Calcutta. Now, the traffic of goods was from the hinterland to the coastal areas because it was a maritime empire. The resources traveled from the hinterland to the coast, and then from the coast to London, to the metropolitan, or to other parts of the empire. It is very natural, therefore, that compared to the hinterland, the coastal areas will gain somewhat because of the working of the British Empire. I'm not arguing that the British were, favoring the South or the West in any manner whatsoever. Their intention, of course, was to exploit the country as much as possible, and they did it with tremendous amount of success for more than 150 years. But certainly, as a byproduct of the inherent nature of that empire, this point becomes important. Regarding the second explanation that you gave about social reforms and its role, I think this is largely, a post facto interpretation of the higher development that has happened in the South and the West. And of course, we have heard it from many people. I'm sure that you have also applied your mind to it. I don't think that social reforms or social renaissance did not happen in the North. It did happen, but it could not be sustained, and there you are right. Why is it that it could not be sustained? I believe that it could not be sustained mainly for two reasons. One was, of course, as I already said, that in terms of basic development, whether of infrastructure, human development, IMR, all other things, North India was way behind. And that is precisely why it needed a lot of public investment. And that public investment, I argue, because of the political economy of this country, never happened in Northern India. On its own, it could never take off. It could neither invest adequately in human capital, in human development, nor could it obviously create the physical infrastructure. And that is precisely what prepared the ground for the great divergence, as you have rightly said, from the 1990s. So the real question is, I agree that human development has to precede economic growth in a sustainable manner. But why is it that certain parts of India were able to do it and others were not able to do it? I think, we have to think through it in that manner. Uh, you see, I do not know. The argument is given that caste somehow influenced or affected adversely the growth of human development in the north. But is this really so? Is there any empirical study done on this subject? I believe that this argument started emerging, from what I know as a student of history, only from the 1990s. It started emerging from the 1990s because obviously by that time the gap between the northern states on the one hand and southern and western, it had become rather visible. Till the 1980s, till my childhood, I remember very well. I mean, the image of the Madrasi was not in any way as a superior image, in fact. But this started changing from the 1990s. UP was not regarded as an underdeveloped state by those of us who lived in UP, but from the 90s we developed this consciousness that we are left behind. So that's another thing. Just a moment.
My God, so many notes. Full page of notes.
Yes. Just a moment. Yes. Now, one question that I would like to ask you, and you are very well placed to answer this. Is there any country in the post World War era, any large country, I would say? You talked about how we could not develop human, indicators, development indicators, and because of which growth could not be sustained because there wasn't enough demand in the economy for manufacturers and industries. And I completely agree with you. We never had enough demand for most of our post-independence period. But is there any large, underdeveloped, less developed country in the post-Second World War which was able to develop, become at least an upper middle income country, if not really a developed country, without following an export led strategy? Was there any country that could sustain that kind of industrialization or manufacturing, relying on its domestic demand?
Okay.
I have many other things which I'll carry on. It will require a separate session, but
Right.
these are the essential things.
Okay, so let me
wanted to.
let me respond, and I assure you I will answer your question.
Yeah.
I'm going to take Ravi's question before I take yours. Huh? Okay. So, first of all, Ravi, I'm actually not in too much disagreement with you. Because what you do is to, when you say it's not the agrarian system itself which contributed, it was the degree of extraction by the British. And essentially what you are saying is that this north-south divergence, we inherited in 1947.
Yes.
That's essentially what you're saying.
Exactly. And then by our policies, we continued or exacerbated it. This is
right. Now, we were not masters of our own destiny till 1947. We've been masters of our own destiny since 1947. So we can only think about what should have been or could have been done and what didn't happen. And that's essentially my argument. Now, I'm not in disagreement with you at all that there was a certain amount of divergence. I'm even saying that, by the way, and I've looked at the data here, in 1950, UP's poverty rate is not that different from what you find in Bengal or in Tamil Nadu. And even in 1990, you don't find that much of a difference in the poverty rate. I'm talking about NSS estimates, okay? So the big divergence does happen post 1992. I'm going to come back to your question on how much economic reforms have to do with this. Totally agree with you, the coastal areas gained in the British period, that the extraction was greatest. Now the extraction, I think this argument, I didn't make it explicit, but it was inevitable. I mean, it was part of what I was arguing, that it's because the extraction was great. I'm glad you made that point, and you made that very explicit, which I'm very grateful to you for that. But all I'm saying, what I was focusing on was the effects post-independence of that extraction and the system that we inherited, the agrarian system, relations that we inherited. So essentially, that's what I have to say on your social reform. I agree with you that, of course, there were efforts at social reform in the North, but they were nowhere close to being as based on mass mobilization of the lower castes as was done by Narayan Guru in Kerala, as was done by Periyar and his successors in Tamil Nadu. Essentially, that's my argument. My argument is not that there is no social reform movement. It's the social mobilization. First, the strength of the social mobilization is not as strong. And second, for reasons which are still unclear to me, and I'd be delighted to be educated about this, the social reform movements or the social justice movements, let's call them, because that's what they are today called in Bihar, in UP, etc. The social justice movements did not translate into effective social policy which would have a transformative effects on the lives of people.
Yeah, this is precisely, if I may interrupt you,
this
is precisely where I differ.
Okay.
In fact, you say that in the North, this thing started only with Mayawati Mulayam. No, it started way back with the agrarian, Zamindari abolition report of Chaudhry Charan Singh, which was written as early as 1947-48. And let me say one thing, as a student of history, I will say that the Zamindari abolition in Uttar Pradesh, it had a deep social impact, in fact, and it was a very, very effective Zamindari abolition. Uttar Pradesh had 4 dominant Zamindari communities. Muslims were one important community, Thakurs were another, Brahmins were the third one. Certainly, these 3 were the dominant landholding communities, and most of them lost most of their land as a result of the Zamindari abolition that was done. And so, and the social groups that benefited are the today's OBCs. They were the dominant beneficiaries. It happened there.
I agree with you. I don't have a disagreement with you. But all I'm saying is that the parties that emerged as a result of that redistribution of land, I'm not saying there was no redistribution of land, but I'm sure you're not arguing that the redistribution of land was anywhere close to what happened in Kerala or what happened in Kashmir. I'm sure you're not saying that. I'd be appalled if you were to make that argument. That's all I'm saying. I'm making a relative argument. 1, 2. There was an intellectual muscle behind the Narayan Guru, the Periyar, the Phule movements. You tell me who were the intellectuals of? I mean, yes, you can say Madhulimay was and George Fernandez was, and but how much did it translate into a political power and actual social transformation? That's really what my argument. Now we may have an argument
we'll carry on.
We can continue on this forever and ever. And in the interest of time, you've asked the question, and I'm going to only deal with that. Any large country post 1945 which did not do export-led, did not experience export-led growth? Well, I think every country which has sustained growth has done, especially large countries. Okay?
Yeah,
large
that's
economy,
why I put that.
Large economy. Every large economy which has sustained growth in the post 1945 epoch have adopted both import substituting industrialization for a certain period of time and have then simultaneously or in sequence switched to export-led growth. Our problem is we allowed import substituting industrialization to dominate our thinking for a 40-year period from 1950 to 1990. China abandoned it, Brazil had abandoned it. Most countries which managed to grow and pull away from India, all the all countries which are today upper middle income countries in Southeast, they pulled away after import substituting industrialization began to reach the end of its potential.
And this has happened before our eyes.
We did not.
We did not.
And our failure was that. I would just, leave it at that. So let me, in the interest of time, answer both your question.
I think what I suggest is we have, it's quite late now. So we'll carry on the discussion. We'll carry on the discussion.
I'll be very
brief.
brief.
A few minutes, and after that we'll.
I'll be very brief. I'll be very brief. You asked the question about the demographic dividend, I think. I mean, one of you did. Why? Huh? You did. One of you did. Why is it? What are the risks of not realizing the dividend in the next 15 years? 15 years is what I'm saying. If 2040 is already way too late. Between now and 15, if we don't provide the jobs, if we don't grow at 8+% plus, which is what the southern states managed to do, we are going to face two eventualities. I don't think most people understand this. One, our population would already be quite aged. A very significant share of our population will be over 60 or 65. They will not either want to work, or if they are working, they are doing it out of sheer desperation because they have no social security. Which is why I've been arguing in my recent writings for the last 5 years in particular, how India can actually ensure for 91% of its workforce social security. 91% of our workforce has no social security. If that's this, even if 75% of our workforce has no social security in 2040, how in a population where the working age share is dropping, that's what the end of the dividend is, that the working age share is dropping, the working age absolute population is dropping. You understand? That's where China is. Since 2015, for the last 7 years, their absolute population of working age is dropping, which is why they are so worried since then. You know what their leaders say? If they are saying this with 5 times our income, then you can imagine what what tragedy awaits us. Their leaders were saying from 2015 onwards, Europe became rich after they became before they became old. Europe became rich before they became old. We have become old without becoming rich. And they are saying is, despite the fact that they have a per capita income 4 times ours. That's one big issue. The second big issue is the health costs of an aging population. We're not even spending enough for our current population. And the aged population will need more health expenditure, public expenditure, because if they don't have social security, if they are still too poor, how do you expect them to be able to pay the out-of-pocket costs that, for quality care, you and I don't pay because we are covered we are among the 9%. You understand? Can you imagine what their life will be like? They will be pushed into poverty each time they fall ill, and their life expectancy would have increased over the next 15 to 20 years. Isn't it? The result of this will be this mass of poverty that we are still surrounded by, that might continue. Very quickly, why growth after 1992? Yes, of course, it has a lot to do with the economic reforms. There have been mistakes post-economic reforms. I've written about it, can't talk about it. Yes, of course, the reason is very much that. Your question about industrial growth and economic growth was happening, but where was human development? That's essentially the thrust of your argument. Where was human development there, right? I've actually studied their history rather carefully myself. If what you're saying might be true, you see, might be true till about 1850. After about 1860 or 1870 onwards, there is empirical evidence to suggest very, very clearly. And please remember, I'm going to make that argument in a minute, but you have to remember that when their first industrial revolution was taking place, between the year 1800 and the year 1900, that's the period mainly of their first industrial and their second industrial revolution, right? You know how much their population grew by? Merely from 185 million, I'm talking about Europe. That was the base of the industrial revolution, right? 1800, population 185 million. 1900, total population 400 million. Mere doubling. What have we experienced, the developing countries post 1950? A tripling, quadrupling, quintupling in a much shorter period of time. Point one. Next point, much more important. It goes to the heart of the sort of question you were asking. And this will interest you because you're a historian. Between 1880 and 1980, just as growth is happening in the now industrialized countries, and growth then is barely, 2% per annum. It's not any greater than that. Today, if India grows at 2%, that's a recession, because we have such little time left for our dividend to end. For us, less than 5% growth is a recession, because we cannot afford to grow at less than 5%. We are much too poor. The G20, I mean, we are the poorest country among the G20 countries. Our per capita income is just over $2,000. Huh? And to become an upper middle income country, we have to get to $4,000. What is the meaning of that? We have to grow at upwards of 7 to 8% per annum for the next 20 years straight, without volatility. The poorer states in the north have it's not that they've not grown recently, quite reasonably far, but great volatility. Ye chalega nahi. You need sustained growth over a long period of time, because thankfully our population growth rate is down to 1% per annum. So going back to the historical argument, 1880 to 1980, just as they were growing at 2% per annum, their public revenue and public spending grew over a 100-year period from 11% of GDP in 1880 to 40 to 45% of GDP in 1980. Over a 100-year period, as per capita income grew, tax revenues grew, as a result of which public expenditure grew. So the size of the state grew, and believe it or not, that they were spending on three items and only three items which were driving the size of the state: health expenditure, public health, education, and social transfers, social insurance. I have been saying that these are our biggest weaknesses. Although our per capita income has quadrupled between 1992 and now, our tax to GDP ratio is still at 17%. This is the contrast that you need to keep in mind. And one of the things that is holding back our growth, as I am arguing, is precisely this neglect of health, education, and social transfers. I'm calling direct poverty reduction action. Let's stop there.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Mehrotra, for that great lecture. And of course, we have had a great discussion as well. I thank all members of the audience once again. Thank you very much.
Very nice.